The Golden Robe, written and read by Julian Brown. The Golden Robe, Part 4, The Empire of Dust. Leopold struggled to free himself from the rubble around him. Amazingly, he didn't seem to be hurt. Just as he managed to push the large block of concrete off his body, there was another loud, earth-shattering blast, followed by more concrete falling on top of him. He repeated the same freeing himself procedure again, only for the same thing to keep happening, with him becoming trapped, then free, trapped, and so on. Still not a scar, nor a bruise or cut on him. Where was all this concrete falling from? There was only one ceiling. He freed himself from the latest ceiling beam to fall across his legs and crawled in darkness over the trashed apartment block, hearing the cries and screams of other people suffering nearby. Another blast, and he was once again encased in rock, this time so securely that he could hardly move. The haunting cries got louder and more piercing, sending shockwaves through his already traumatized flesh. Then, one by one, bodies arose from the floor, the dead coming back to life, moving awkwardly, covered in blood, some headless or with missing body parts. The zombified entities staggered towards him. Then he heard his name come from the lips of one of them, then another and another, until slowly a whole mob of half-dead beings were in front of him, each one repeating his name in vengeful tones. Leopold! He was so firmly locked into the concrete slabs around him that he couldn't move at all. He began screaming as the zombies surrounded him on all sides, certain that their intentions for him were not pleasant. Then the first pair of hands pressed around his neck, followed by another pair of hands, as the mob tried to choke the life out of him. Gasping for air, he managed to free his right arm and flung it out in front of him. "No!" he cried out. Leopold looked around his large, modern Art Deco bedroom, still trying desperately to catch his breath. It took him a few minutes to realize it had only been a bad dream, a very bad one. The same nightmare, in fact, he'd been having every night for weeks. They were always so real. Realer than real, in many ways. As these days, Leopold's emotional life had collapsed in on itself. He felt numb most of the time. The things that used to give him at least a little relief, barely even triggering a response now. Scratching his balding head while looking at his 40-something-year-old body in the bathroom mirror, though still fairly trim, the pot belly that protruded, hanging over his boxers, and his wrinkled, bloodshot eyes spoke of the excesses of his decadent lifestyle. What was the meaning of this dream? What was his subconscious trying to tell him? He needed to speak to somebody, anybody, but there was no one left. It had been months since he'd spoken to anyone but his security detail, with most people around him finally showing their true colors and abandoning him to his fate. All he had left was the Golden Robe. It had lived up to its promise and given him everything he had asked for, but he still wasn't happy. Far from it. Leopold was in a more wretched state now than ever. Never before recognizing the value of having people around who could give him checks and balances, he could not remember the last time he washed or had a shave. No one could bear his negative attitude and unreasonable stubbornness any longer. He felt completely alone. He called Mike on the intercom, who came through the door with fresh coffee. Mike, his prized security agent/interpreter, asked how Leopold was. "Not doing too good, Mike," answered Leopold. "I just can't seem to get it together lately." Mike opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it and stepped back. "Out with it," barked Leopold. "It's not my place, sir," said Mike, trying to change the subject. "Do you need more sugar?" "Mike," Leopold blurted out accusingly, then said in a pleading tone, almost begging, "You're the only one who's left. The only man I've ever really been able to trust. The only thing that resembles reality in my world is you, Mike. The women who charge $1,000 an hour to pretend they like me, the judges with their hands out, the politicians waiting for my instructions, the fake friends slithering around who want to inherit some of this empire of dust before it finally washes out with the tide. Everyone has an agenda, Mike. Some selfish, ulterior motive. None of it's real. None of it's honest. Only you, Mike. Only you are truth. Tell me like it is, Mike. Please. Why don't you take a break, sir? A break, Mike? From all this? What do you mean take a break, Mike? I can take breaks whenever I like. I don't have to report to anyone. What I mean, sir, is... Mike hesitated, stepping cautiously with his temperamental employer. Why don't you take a step back from it all? For a few weeks or months even. You don't owe anyone anything. Why not take some time for yourself to get the help that you need? Mike didn't need to spell it out. Leopold knew he was referring to the Grove or some such plush psychiatric facility for the filthy rich. Maybe you're right, Mike. Maybe you're right. Leopold trailed off as he hung his head over his coffee cup, seemingly lost in the swirling, spiraling motion of the cream as he poured it in slowly. Yes, I will have some more sugar, Mike. Thanks. Leopold took a gulp of the fresh hot coffee and smiled as the rich brew warmed his insides, giving thanks and praise to the gods of coffee for this strong caffeinated boost to his low mood. Kenyan, I love this stuff. Niggers make the best coffee. Looking up at Mike, he said apologetically, Sorry, Mike. Sometimes I forget that you're black. I didn't mean any offense. Mike seemed unperturbed. None taken, sir. Leopold always suspected there was something terribly wrong with him, but figured being born into wealth made it okay. Only the plebs had to worry about things like mental health. Something about what Mike said resonated with him, though, and it didn't take long to convince himself to give the Grove a try. After 3 months at the Grove, Leopold still hadn't revealed much about his inner world to anyone, preferring to keep his thoughts his own, locked up inside himself. He was surprised at the people he came across in there. CEOs, managing directors of international firms, army generals, bankers, plenty of the people he'd been in cahoots with in his wonder years. Some opened up about their crimes, feeling a conscious easing catharsis in the sharing. Tales of creative illegal money laundering, embezzling billions of dollars, crashing economies for a better stock portfolio, imaginative population control strategies, all spoken freely in this safe space for the haunted handlers of planet Earth. Others, like Leopold, preferred to just take it all in, and to heal themselves vicariously through the extroversion of these tortured rich men's selfish testimonials. Who would believe him anyway, that it was him who was the key component in starting World War III? If he'd had the gall to open up in group therapy about his meetings with the Russian premier, the plans to make a literal killing in oil profits from both sides of the conflict, the other patients would likely just believe such statements to be a part of his mental illness, grandiosity, and an overinflated sense of importance, delusions of grandeur, too many nights on the source. He wasn't a show-off like these puffed-up men around him in this circle. He'd never embarked on such projects for the glory, quite the opposite. The whole thing was really about how much you could get away with without a soul knowing, a need-to-know basis, where only a very few needed to know. Leopold, would you like to share? The words of the pretty-faced volunteer woke him from his inner dialogue. This week's discussion was about emotional intelligence. The group had been sharing examples from their lives of when they'd acted with it or wished they'd had more of it to act with. Act was the operative word, with concepts like empathy being totally alien to psychopaths like Leopold, who would periodically study such ideas and then put on his best performance of empathy to appear as human as possible. Certainly, the ex-wives of some of these troubled men had plenty of emotional intelligence and had taken their husbands to the cleaners with it. If men like this could manage to distill this empathic quality down to its raw essence, its active ingredient, and harness it for use in their projects for world domination, just imagine how much more control they could have over people. The guise of empathy would enable them to eviscerate the earth even more effectively than they had already done, while receiving awards and accreditation for their efforts. The hypocrisy of Nobel Peace Prizes for the most humane torture methods. "No thanks. I don't feel like sharing today," replied Leopold sheepishly. Not that he ever felt like sharing his thoughts with any of these people. Still, the sparkle in the eye of the volunteer held out hope that one day he would. "Well, maybe next time then," she said with a smile. They had repeated this ritual every week for the past 3 months. She moved on to the next person in the circle, who, unlike Leopold, was happy to take center stage and rant on at length about everything he claimed to know on the subject. Leopold was intrigued by this woman. She had been here every week without fail since he'd arrived at the Grove. She wasn't like the other volunteers who seemed to just turn up to get their timesheet stamped. While they seemed bored and did little, she really got involved in the sessions, getting the men to talk about things they'd kept bottled up for decades. Maybe it just needed a woman's touch. Her smile was definitely disarming. Leopold was becoming quite besotted with this young woman. She wasn't even being paid, yet she showed more heartfelt enthusiasm than most of these professionals with several letters after their names, who were making a small fortune working here at the Grove. The session came to an end, and Leopold thought he'd have a word with this volunteer before she left. As the men filtered out of the room, he stayed seated, holding his head as if in pain. Once she noticed him, she came over and asked, "Leopold, are you okay?" He looked up with an innocent puppy dog expression to elicit the sympathy of the attractive woman. "Not really." "What's wrong?" she asked. Leopold delayed his response for dramatic effect and to draw more of her positive attention towards him. "It's just that, well, I have so much to say, but I'm just not used to talking to anyone about it." The volunteer sat down beside him and considered his words before saying, "Yes, you are quite the enigma. In fact, I think this is the most I've ever heard you speak." The other volunteers had already left, no doubt glad to be free from this place. She seemed, though, to have all the time in the world for Leopold. "I've got a little time before I leave, if you want to talk," she invited. Leopold looked up at this gorgeous woman in her early 30s. Slim build, cheerful demeanor. She was like a walking breath of fresh air. Dark-skinned, heart-shaped face, with big, childlike, caring eyes. She had her hair in a plaited style he wasn't familiar with. "You are remarkable, do you know that?" he commented after taking her in. The volunteer replied humbly, "I'm just a volunteer," though her grin showed that she appreciated the compliment. "But why?" asked Leopold. "Why what?" "Why would you come here every week and give of your time, your energy, for us, of all people, and for no payment?" "Well, there are some things worth more than money, Leopold." "Really? Such as?" "The experience, the knowledge. It's priceless. I'm learning so much more in these group therapy sessions than I do the rest of the week in class. This is more, well, hands-on." "So you're interested in a career in mental health?" "Yes. I've always been a protector of sorts, looking after my sisters when my mum wasn't well, and then eventually I had to look after her as well. It's in me to want to help people. I was working as a mentor in corporate in London before this, but it wasn't really fulfilling me." "London?" exclaimed Leopold. "That's quite a journey you're having to make." "Oh no, I stay in Oxford. The rest of the week I'm cooped up in stuffy study rooms, so I really enjoy a break from that, being here once a week. Oxford University? Leopold had read something about Oxford and Cambridge making places available for students of African descent. Something about not enough of them going to the top universities and the need for more diversity. Oh no, not the university, it's a college. They teach health and social care courses. I was able to get a bursary, so that really helps with my rent and my outgoings. Amazing, said Leopold, who was having the most fun he had experienced in months connecting with this lovely woman. His standard female fare was of the hit and run variety. Most of the women he knew were just as manipulative and lacking in moral scruples as he was, if not more so. The women in his family would never dream of making such sacrifices for others, happy to be seen publicly giving a tiny fraction of their immense wealth to charity, but not so keen on doing any of the actual charity work itself. And now, Leopold, I have a question for you. Why the Grove? Why travel all the way to England? Don't they have any places like this in America? Leopold replied, smiling flirtatiously. Ah, yes, they do. But you see, I have my finer tastes. Only the best will do for me. She seemed to warm to his words. He continued. You're a special soul. I don't imagine just anyone can do what you do. And you have a real skill for it. The way you get us blockheads to look at ourselves. In such a world of terrible self-centeredness, what a diamond you are in your selflessness. Oh, you're making me blush now. She was visibly moved by his praise. I still like the good things in life, though. I have my finer tastes too. That's why I'm volunteering here, at the Grove, and not at the Maudsley. The Maudsley? Leopold was unfamiliar with the name. It's a psychiatric hospital in South London, not far from where I live. Would have made more sense for me to volunteer there, but I didn't want to. The clientele at the Maudsley could never afford to come here. Ah, I see. A mental hospital for the plebs, thought Leopold. He had never felt so alive in years. Speaking with this woman was for him like the first conversation he'd ever really had with a woman. So why did you finally decide to leave your last job then? The volunteer wasn't usually so keen to give this much information away about herself in this setting where she, not Leopold, was meant to be the therapist. But she was excited at seeing this usually inwardly caged, silent man so chatty and expressive. She wanted to encourage it. Well, I was mentoring a young man who just started at an insurance firm when one day he just disappeared, never to be seen again. At the time, I took it as a sign to get out while I still could. Disappeared? Quizzed Leopold. Oh, it was all a very strange affair. There was a shop that disappeared too. One day it was there, next day it was gone. All very weird. People and shops don't just disappear. Leopold paused as if something sharp had pierced him inside. He leaked out an involuntary moan. The golden robe. The change in tone of voice and the sudden emotional weight that sank into these words caught the volunteer off guard. For a few seconds, it was like she was standing in front of a vacant shell with nobody home. Leopold, are you okay? She spoke into the void. Slowly his vision came back from a blur into focus, and he returned from wherever he had gone. He read her name from the label pinned to her blouse. Though she'd been coming to the group for months, he never knew what her name was or thought to ask. I'm okay, thanks, Laura. I'm glad you're back. I'm not sure where you went there, said Laura. I'm going to have to get going now, but maybe we can continue this conversation next week after the group. You seem to open up more in a one-to-one setting. I don't mind staying an extra 20 minutes or so. Really? You'd do that for me? It's what I'm here for, Leopold. They were both glad that they would be meeting weekly and privately from now on, both curious to find out what the other knew about the golden robe. Small world, thought Leopold. Thank you, Laura. I can't wait.